For 27 days, enemy forces searched for Captain Jessica Williams with helicopters, tracking dogs, and thermal imaging. They knew she was somewhere in their territory, but they could never find her. When Jessica finally emerged from the wilderness, her survival techniques would shock military experts around the world. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter was flying 200 feet above the dense jungle canopy when the surface-to-air missile struck its tail rotor. Captain Jessica Williams had exactly 4 seconds to brace for impact before the aircraft spiraled into the trees and crashed in a remote valley deep inside enemy territory. Jessica was 29 years old, stood 5'6" with blonde hair that she kept in a regulation bun, and blue eyes that seemed to calculate survival probabilities automatically. She had been serving as an intelligence officer with the 82nd Airborne Division for 7 years, but nothing in her training had prepared her for what she was about to endure. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. When Jessica regained consciousness, she was hanging upside down in her safety harness with blood trickling from a head wound. The helicopter's cabin was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning fuel. 3 of her fellow crew members were dead, and the 4th was critically injured but unconscious. Jessica's first priority was escaping the wreckage before it exploded or attracted enemy forces to her location. She cut herself free from her harness, checked her equipment, and assessed her injuries. Apart from the head wound and several bruises, she was essentially unharmed. But Jessica's situation was dire. She was approximately 18 miles behind enemy lines in mountainous jungle terrain. Her radio had been destroyed in the crash, and she had no way to communicate with friendly forces. Most critically, enemy patrols were already responding to the helicopter's crash site. Jessica could hear vehicles approaching through the jungle less than 2 miles away. She had perhaps 20 minutes before enemy soldiers reached the wreckage and began searching for survivors. Jessica grabbed her survival pack, collected ammunition from the dead crew members, and disappeared into the jungle just as the helicopter's fuel tank exploded behind her. For the next 27 days, Jessica would be completely alone in hostile territory, hunted by an entire enemy army that knew she was in their area but could never locate her exact position. Jessica's survival began with understanding the fundamental challenge she faced. She wasn't just trying to stay alive in harsh environmental conditions. She was trying to remain undetected by military forces that were actively searching for her with sophisticated equipment and extensive local knowledge. Traditional survival techniques focused on finding food, water, and shelter. But Jessica needed survival methods that would keep her invisible to thermal imaging, tracking dogs, helicopter patrols, and ground searches. Jessica's first decision was counterintuitive. Instead of trying to move toward friendly territory, she decided to remain in the same general area where her helicopter had crashed. Enemy forces expected her to attempt escape toward the border, so they concentrated their search efforts along likely escape routes. By staying in the crash zone, Jessica could avoid the heaviest search activity while having access to resources that other areas might not provide. Jessica's second decision involved her approach to shelter. Traditional survival training emphasized building visible shelters that provided protection from weather. But any shelter that protected Jessica from rain and cold would also be detectable by thermal imaging and aerial reconnaissance. Jessica's solution was to create a network of underground hiding places that were invisible from the surface but provided adequate protection from environmental hazards. Using her survival knife and improvised tools, Jessica excavated small cave systems in hillsides and beneath large tree root systems. These underground shelters were camouflaged so effectively that someone could walk directly over them without knowing they existed. Each shelter was equipped with emergency supplies, cached water, and concealed ventilation systems that prevented heat signatures from being detected by thermal imaging equipment. But Jessica's most innovative survival technique involved her approach to movement and foraging. Jessica realized that moving during daylight hours was impossible due to constant helicopter patrols and the risk of encountering ground search teams. But moving at night was equally dangerous because enemy forces used thermal imaging and motion sensors that could detect human activity in darkness. Jessica's solution was to adopt what she called micro-movement patterns. Instead of traveling long distances, Jessica would move very short distances during specific weather conditions that masked her heat signature and confused tracking equipment. During rainstorms, Jessica could move up to half a mile while remaining invisible to thermal imaging. During heavy fog, she could forage for food and water while avoiding visual detection. During high winds, she could move through areas where motion sensors were unreliable. These micro-movements allowed Jessica to access different resource areas while maintaining her overall concealment in the same general region. Jessica's approach to food procurement was equally innovative. Traditional survival training emphasized hunting small game and foraging for plants. But hunting created noise and movement that could attract enemy attention, and foraging in obvious locations might reveal her presence to search teams. Jessica developed techniques for obtaining food from sources that enemy forces wouldn't monitor or recognize. She learned to harvest insects and larvae that provided complete proteins without requiring hunting or obvious foraging activities. She identified underground plant roots and fungal growths that were invisible from the surface but provided essential nutrients. Most remarkably, Jessica figured out how to utilize the enemy's own supply lines for her survival needs. By carefully observing enemy patrol patterns, Jessica identified locations where supply convoys regularly discarded small amounts of food and equipment. She learned to scavenge these locations during specific time windows when they were unmonitored, but before other scavengers could remove useful materials. Jessica's water procurement techniques were the most sophisticated aspect of her survival strategy. Clean water was abundant in the jungle environment, but accessing it without detection required careful planning and innovative techniques. Jessica created water collection systems that gathered rainwater and condensation without creating visible installations that could be spotted by aerial reconnaissance. She dug concealed wells that accessed groundwater while remaining completely hidden from surface observation. Most importantly, Jessica learned to purify water using techniques that didn't require fires or other activities that might create detectable heat signatures or smoke. Jessica's camouflage and concealment techniques went far beyond standard military training. She developed methods for eliminating human scent that would prevent tracking dogs from following her trail. She learned to move through terrain in ways that left no physical traces that could be detected by experienced trackers. Jessica even modified her own biological rhythms to minimize detection risks. She shifted her sleep patterns to match natural animal activity cycles, ensuring that her movements would blend with normal jungle sounds and behaviors. But Jessica's most remarkable achievement was learning to use the enemy's search efforts to her own advantage. After weeks of observation, Jessica began to understand the patterns and limitations of the enemy's search operations. She learned to predict when and where helicopter patrols would be active. She identified gaps in ground patrol coverage. She recognized the behavioral patterns of tracking dog teams. Jessica used this intelligence to not just avoid detection, but to actually improve her survival situation by accessing resources during specific time windows when search activity was predictably absent. By her 40th day in enemy territory, Jessica had established a survival routine that was so sophisticated that she was essentially invisible to the extensive search operations being conducted around her. But Jessica's situation became more challenging when enemy forces began using new search techniques specifically designed to locate hidden survivors. Enemy commanders had realized that traditional search methods weren't working, so they began implementing more sophisticated approaches that included long-term observation, psychological warfare, and systematic terrain analysis. Jessica adapted by developing even more advanced concealment techniques. She learned to create false trails that would lead search teams away from her actual hiding areas. She developed methods for observing enemy search patterns without being detected herself. She even began using enemy search activities to identify new resource opportunities. During her 60th day in hiding, Jessica made a discovery that would transform her survival strategy. While observing an enemy base from a concealed position, Jessica realized that she could obtain intelligence information that would be valuable to friendly forces if she could somehow communicate it. Jessica began documenting enemy troop movements, supply routes, and operational patterns. She created detailed maps of enemy installations and recorded information about equipment and personnel that could be useful for future military operations. This intelligence gathering gave Jessica a sense of purpose beyond mere survival and motivated her to continue her concealment activities, even when the physical and psychological stress became almost unbearable. But Jessica's most dangerous period came during her 80th day, when enemy forces implemented a systematic grid search of the entire area using coordinated teams of soldiers and tracking specialists. The grid search was designed to leave no area unexamined and no hiding place undiscovered. Jessica watched from her concealed positions as search teams methodically examined every cave, tree, and potential shelter within miles of her location. Jessica's survival during this period required her to utilize every technique she had developed over the previous 2 months. She had to remain motionless for days at a time while search teams worked within yards of her hiding places. Jessica's underground shelters proved to be perfectly designed for this challenge. The search teams never suspected that someone could be hiding directly beneath their feet in concealed chambers that were invisible from the surface. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, enemy forces concluded that Jessica had either died from her injuries or had successfully escaped the area. The systematic search operations were discontinued, and Jessica's survival environment returned to manageable levels of danger. But Jessica's ordeal was far from over. She still faced months of survival in hostile territory with no prospect of rescue and no communication with friendly forces. Jessica's psychological resilience during this period was as remarkable as her physical survival skills. She maintained hope and mental focus despite complete isolation and constant danger. Jessica developed mental techniques for managing stress, maintaining motivation, and preserving cognitive function during extended periods of extreme hardship. On her 100th day in enemy territory, Jessica made the decision that would ultimately lead to her rescue. Instead of continuing to wait for rescue that might never come, Jessica decided to attempt contact with friendly forces by making her way to a location where she could signal for help. But Jessica's approach to this escape attempt was unlike anything in standard survival doctrine. Instead of trying to reach friendly territory, Jessica planned to conduct intelligence operations that would force friendly forces to recognize her presence and coordinate her rescue. Jessica had identified an enemy communications facility that transmitted intelligence information to regional command centers. She realized that if she could disrupt this facility in a specific way, the attack would create a signature that friendly intelligence agencies would recognize as indicating her presence and location. Jessica's plan was incredibly dangerous. It required her to emerge from concealment, penetrate enemy security, and conduct sabotage operations that would almost certainly result in massive search efforts designed to capture her. But Jessica calculated that the intelligence value of her 100 pause days of observation was worth the risk, and that attempting active rescue was preferable to indefinite hiding. On day 1115 of her survival ordeal, Jessica executed her sabotage plan. Under cover of darkness, Jessica approached the enemy communications facility and planted improvised explosive devices that would destroy specific equipment while leaving clear evidence of professional military demolition techniques. The attack was successful, but it immediately triggered the largest enemy search operation that Jessica had yet faced. Thousands of soldiers, dozens of aircraft, and specialized tracking teams were deployed to capture the saboteur who had penetrated their security. But Jessica's attack had achieved its intended effect. Friendly intelligence agencies recognized the sabotage signature and began coordinated efforts to locate and rescue Jessica. For the next 12 days, Jessica conducted a running concealment operation, while both friendly and enemy forces searched for her in the same area. Jessica had to remain hidden from enemy forces while making herself detectable to friendly rescue teams, a challenge that required perfect timing and extraordinary skill. On day 27, Jessica successfully made contact with a special operations rescue team that had been inserted specifically to locate and extract her. Jessica's 127 days alone in enemy territory established a new survival record that exceeded the previous record by more than 3 months. But Jessica's achievement went beyond just survival time. Her intelligence gathering had provided friendly forces with detailed information about enemy operations that led to successful military campaigns and saved countless lives. Jessica's survival techniques were studied and incorporated into advanced survival training programs. Her concealment methods became standard doctrine for personnel operating in hostile territory. Most remarkably, Jessica's intelligence operations during her survival period demonstrated that trapped personnel could contribute valuable information while maintaining their concealment and working toward their own rescue. Today, Captain Jessica Williams continues to serve in military intelligence. Though her current assignment is classified, her 107-day survival experience has made her one of the world's leading experts in long-term survival and concealment techniques. Jessica's survival manual, based on her experience in enemy territory, has become required reading for special operations personnel and intelligence officers who may face similar challenges. But Jessica's greatest achievement wasn't surviving 107 days alone behind enemy lines. It was proving that human ingenuity, determination, and adaptability could overcome impossible circumstances when applied with perfect discipline and unshakable commitment to survival. Jessica Williams didn't just break survival records. She redefined what was possible for a single person facing overwhelming odds in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. Her story stands as proof that sometimes the most impossible challenges are just opportunities for exceptional people to demonstrate that human capability has no real limits when survival depends on refusing to give up.